let me know when you're set.
Perfect. Thanks for doing that, David.
Great. Excellent. So let's get started. So welcome everyone to the meeting this evening. We're going to be talking about resilient Ansonia and some strategies for securing the city's long-term resilience and some of the strategies around the downtown in particular. We're excited to be joining everyone tonight. My name is Jeffrey Morrison Logan. I'm the project manager from AECOM, and I'd like to maybe officially just hand it over to the mayor this evening just for a few words about welcoming us officially for this evening, and maybe talking, Mayor, about some of the important initiatives downtown and how this project may help you out in the future as well. So, Mayor, if you'd like to welcome everyone, that would be great.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jeffrey, for them words. I want to welcome AECOM and Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments as they assist us in the Resilient Project, especially my recharge ideas for Ansonia. And hopefully we got some good things that could happen with this.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mayor. We really appreciate those words and welcome to those who are here. And I think we're going to hopefully get a few more people that'll join in as the evening progresses. And since we're a relatively smaller group this evening, maybe we'll take a few seconds and do a couple other introductions. From AECOM,
Sure.
We're also joined by Ellie on our side as well. Ellie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ellie Peterson. I'm with the AECOM team, and I'm a landscape designer that's assisting on this project.
Excellent. Thanks, Ellie. And we also are joined this evening with a couple of key staff members from CIRCA, which is the state kind of resiliency group, helping to fund and oversee the project as well. David, let me hand it off to you to give a quick introduction.
Hey, everyone. David Murphy, Director of Resilience Engineering at CIRCA. And the mayor, you're not wrong, Mayor Cassetti. We did involve NVCOG earlier stages of this, the planning phase in particular. So although they may not be in the call tonight, but they're still staying involved to some degree.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Excellent. I think we have John on as well from CIRCA. John, let me hand it off to you for a quick introduction.
Sure. Hi, everybody. John Trzynski. I'm the Director of Resilience Planning at CIRCA. Work with David and happy to be here tonight. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks so much, John. Appreciate that. So let's dive right in. We have about an hour to hour and a half on our agenda for the evening. And this is the second of our two public workshops. It's really to talk about the heart of downtown Ansonia and a lot of the potential to think about resiliency efforts and about what the future might look like in many different locations. So tonight we're going to give a quick little overview about, what does it mean to be a resiliency project in Connecticut? We'll talk a little bit about the study area and the focus of what the project has entailed to date, and where we're kind of intentionally focusing on some of the key issues. Our last public meeting, we spent a lot of time in several different focus areas within the downtown, and we talked about vulnerabilities, about heat, and about things like that. And we're going to do a quick recap about what we talked about last time. And then most importantly for tonight, Ellie and myself, we're going to tag team a little bit here, and we're going to go through just understanding things that we can almost prioritize a lot of the projects that we've shared last time, where they focus on some of the things that we can do now in terms of the near term, on really honing into things that we think can be very impactful for the residents and the business owners from a resiliency perspective. And then we'll also spend a little bit of time on the second bullet here about thinking ahead. We'll talk a little bit about this idea around a kit of parts in terms of how the entire downtown can continue to move forward with a series of projects that will secure a long-term resiliency perspective by applying a lot of strategies over time throughout the entire downtown. And maybe after about 15 to 20 minutes of this, we'll open it up for some conversation and get some perspectives back from those that have joined us this evening as well. And as I mentioned, we're recording this evening's meeting, and we'll work with the city to get this posted on the website for those, and make sure that we give the public time to give us some feedback as well. So with that, Ellie, let's go on to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about where we are, what we're doing as well. So if we go on to the next one here as well. So a little bit of a recap about, what is Resilient Connecticut. Through the work that David and John are doing throughout the state, we're now into multiple phases of work where they've worked with a range of communities throughout the state, understanding both from the coastal features as well as inland communities like Ansonia, where there's issues around either sea level rise or flooding issues. how can the state work closely with the municipalities to be able to understand that profile about flooding, resiliency issues, and really hone in on areas that if you target certain improvements, it can really secure a long-term future. So this is a study area map that shows downtown Ansonia. It shows some of the focus areas, especially in around the downtown, and some of the most walkable, accessible areas in along the river, and how back even a few years ago really targeted this as a major opportunity to think about securing some of your resiliency issues for the future as well. So let's go on to the next slide. So where are we focusing more specifically within that map that we just shared? The red line here shows the study area that we're focusing in on. Again, a little bit more zoomed in to the downtown proper. We have things like East Main Street, West Main Street, and Main Street itself as they run north-south up and down the drawing here. Ellie, maybe you can point out where Ansonia Brass and Copper Mill Site is on the map here as well. It's in the middle off to the right-hand side. And you can see like the river that runs through here. Route 8 is up towards the kind of the north and runs kind of parallel to the river, thinking about Route 8 connections. And then right in the heart of downtown, as many of you know, have the train station that provides access to the region and also critical mobility opportunity in the downtown to get the city connected as well. Let's go on to the next slide. So Ellie, you want to talk a little bit about this one? Because in addition to the study area, really we started to hone in about why we're focusing in on these areas from the assets that are there today.
Yeah, we felt it would be helpful to just have an aerial view of the downtown to see how the river really defines our project area. On the right side, you can see the majority of the downtown. That's where the main train station is, as well as City Hall and the police station. We just mentioned the copper and brass facility that's up sort of at the top of the image. And then on the other side of the river is sort of defined by Olson Drive. And there's some fields along Olson Drive that are flagged for development. And then in the very far part of the image, you can see the Route 8 connector, which is the main access to the town. And part of our initiative has been finding ways that we might be able to enhance greater connectivity and transit mobility there.
And another great aspect of this drawing, it shows you the flood wall system that's in there today. And as we've gone through this project, we've realized how critical a piece of infrastructure that is that currently protects the downtown from flooding and so forth. And you're gonna hear us talk a little bit tonight about why in the future, embracing that, further securing it and making it part of the downtown's future is gonna be very important as well. So let's go to the next slide, Ellie. So a little bit about the character. I mentioned the flood walls. Obviously, they're very prominent along the river on both banks of the river, and how it really shows here clearly that it protects through some of the gates that are out there today, and along with some of the existing development that's there, and really how important it is about securing, the development pieces and the flooding that would happen on these sites if those systems were not there. And then knowing in the upper left that Main Street is so close by and what that means for the heart of the community. You grew up around the riverfront. We want to embrace the riverfront and really kind of secure through these initiatives many of the same things. Next slide. And Ellie, do you want to talk a little bit about where we were last time in our last public meeting about why, thinking about heat and vulnerabilities would be important to downtown as well?
Yeah, for those of you that weren't part of the last meeting, we spent a decent amount of time talking about heat vulnerability in Ansonia in particular. Although Ansonia is located more inland, it also shares some of similar heat risks that a lot of coastal communities in Connecticut are facing for the future with climate change. And so we thought it would be helpful to take a transect of the downtown in Ansonia. This is located about where the train station is. So you can see there's Main Street, the river, which is dividing the transect, and then Olson Drive in the background. And just start to identify some of the factors that makes this area more vulnerable to heat currently and into the future. Some of those factors being large buildings that absorb heat and block out wind, large blocks of impervious pavement. Ansonia has a long history of being a very industrial town, and many areas are still blocked out with impervious surfaces, and there's less tree canopy overall as well to block out heat. So these are some of the factors that we are more resilient in the long term.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about some of the design strategies here as well that we've been reflecting on. Ellie, you want to go to the next slide? So when we think about what is a resilient community, and David and John, feel free to join in on the conversation here. It's been great for this project as well as others to be, I'd call it a little bit more holistic in terms of what this means for resiliency issues that are kind of cross-cutting as well. So the idea about, focusing on the benefits of community development, understanding within the community if there's ways that you can get to the downtown, to your water body, to the riverfront, and think about evacuation and the kind of resilient corridors as you navigate the downtown to make sure you're securing primary ways in and out. Thinking about the ecosystems when we think about flood and rain events and stormwater and all those things, by kind of protecting a lot of those existing natural ecosystems, those things perform in a way that help the overall system work in terms of kind of recovering from some of those events. And then thinking about, energy and thinking about economic and social resilience. So as a community, how you are powered, how your economics, how your social infrastructure really starts to work, where you get relief as a community from some of these events. And we'll talk a lot about tonight, this idea of a resilient center for the community. And then just as Ellie mentioned, really the importance of heat and understanding how heat and flooding go together, and really the ability to think about heat island effect and how you were kind of really mitigating some of those things at a very localized level as well. David, anything else you wanted to add to why this is so important to CIRCA from this perspective?
No, you captured it, Jeffrey. Go on.
Okay, great. Let's go on the next slide. Excellent. So tonight, really, again, as I mentioned, there's really two parts this evening. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the near term, some of these kind of priority projects in a way that can really have a major impact, both in terms of the Resilience Center that we'll talk about, in terms of how we're thinking about, transforming some of the downtown assets that are there today. And then we'll go on a little bit later in the evening to talk about some of the broader, more cross-cutting things in terms of thinking ahead about long term. So Ellie, do you want to get us started and talk about some of the resiliency things that we're thinking around the Ansonia, locations and the Armory in particular, and all the evaluation that we did about getting there?
Yeah, absolutely. This is recap for some people that were part of the previous meeting, but we discussed the idea of being able to select buildings that would be great contestants for a public cooling center. And now we're expanding that idea to the idea of actually a resilience center, of a resource in the community that people can rely on during an environmental emergency. And it was important for us to find an area that was part of the existing transit network. So we looked at the bus stops that run through Ansonia, as well as the train network and bike pathways. And then we looked at large public and some private buildings that the community is already fairly familiar with that maybe could be good applicants for a resilience center in the future, or a pop-up resilience center in the case of an emergency need for one. And so based off of this scoring system, there were several buildings that scored most highly. And among those buildings was the Ansonia Armory, which now we've expanded into looking at in a little bit more detail, and trying to determine what would be needed to actually convert the Ansonia Armory into a resilience center. So for those of you that aren't familiar, the Ansonia Armory is located a little bit north of the downtown, right next to the Ansonia Brass and Copper Mill facility, just past the police station. It's really nicely located right along the main bus line, as well as to all the critical facilities in the downtown. And it's also been utilized by the community for a lot of public events. It's been used as a voting station. During COVID, it was used as a coronavirus testing location. And then just last year, it ran the Community Health Improvement Plan workshop, which looked at how the town could encourage more public exercise, especially in the winter months. So due to the familiarity of this place amongst the community, we felt that it was a pretty great test subject to look at for thinking about how a resilience center could work. We also started to brainstorm what essential services would a resilience center actually need. Of course, every climate emergency is a little bit different. Every crisis is a little bit different. So it would be a huge advantage to have lots of open space, lots of flexible space that could be adapted based off of the community's needs. So flexible seating during a heat wave event, making sure that people had access to air conditioning, clean drinking water would be very essential. If the electricity went out, it'd be important that people could make sure that they could, though they would still have the ability to stay connected. And so having backup generator capacity and internet services would be really essential. And then also being able to provide some space for on-call medical assistance, being able to make sure that this location was accessible to all people. So being able to have ADA accessible entrances and public restrooms. And then we also considered if it were an open layout, there would be the necessity to have privacy stalls in case someone needed to make a private phone call, or there were nursing mothers that needed to make sure that they had their own space. And then this building has already been used for a number of public events, so it already has its own waste management system. So it would need, during one of these emergencies, of course, people would need to tap into that. And so these are just a few of the things that came to mind for us, but it might even be interesting during the discussion if people had other ideas of what a resilience center would need, because there might be some ideas that we don't have written here that other people might be able to contribute. But we test fitted this idea on a very high level. And what we learned about the testability and functionality of this building is that, it could have many different seating arrangements. You could have a mixture of seats and tables in the gymnasium. You also could have space for privacy stalls, as I mentioned, and then dedicated spaces for waste management, medical assistance, and even storage of some of the items that are not being used, that are already being that are already there in the gymnasium. They would need a place to go. So this was just sort of our initial look at how this might be able to be adapted. But of course, there could be many different layouts that we could explore here. And so then moving forward, we just talked about what we could do in the short term, but we also want to talk more about what we could do thinking ahead. So how we could have greater resilience planning for the future. And Jeffrey, do you want to introduce this section for us?
Sure. Yes. Let's go on to the next slide here. We can dive right in to this idea that we've looked, as I mentioned before, in very strategic locations throughout the downtown that we can amplify by some key recommendations. So of those, we intentionally look along the riverfront over by Olson, down Main Street as a case study by the train station, East Main Street where City Hall is, next to where the parking lots are, and then off of Riverside Drive to be able to test in a way some strategies that we can put in. So we'll kind of go through this relatively quickly here, but we'd like to show you a little bit about some of the key findings in each of those areas. So if you go on to the next slide here, Ellie, what we'll do is we talk about this kind of kit of parts applying to these locations. And what you'll see here, they're color coded to the left that talks about achieving very different goals. So when you think about some of the natural systems or the landscape, to some of the things about how it's performing on a roadway perspective, wayfinding and signage, solar, and those types of things. It's those types of things that we're talking about, potentially retrofitting some of these locations to make them more resilient, more accessible, and having those features that are frankly are missing today here as well. So maybe, Ellie, let me hand it back to you to talk about some of the specifics of these locations would be great.
Yeah, so here we're looking at being able to encourage a greater green buffer on the roadway. This is showing Main Street, so it's really the hub of downtown, and being able to encourage more walkability here would be a huge asset. And a planted bump out is one way that we sought about doing that. Bump outs create the opportunity for safer streets, and as well as, you know, having aesthetic and some, you know, visual relief. And then as well here, we thought about the opportunity of creating more solar infrastructure. Ansonia Recharged has been looking at incorporating more green energy into the downtown. So we thought, you know, on Main Street might be one place where we could seek to achieve that. Additionally, more signage, thinking about how we can reuse some of our materials through a resiliency lens. So using maybe more permeable paving or lighter colored paving that can reflect heat. These are just a few of the examples that we looked at in the Main Street in particular.
And maybe I'll jump in on this one, Ellie. We over by East Main Street here too. So again, similar kind of kit of parts where we can see the City Hall off in the background there, the building there. But the idea of taking the park that's next door to City Hall, thinking about it as a much improved piece of green infrastructure through landscaping and stormwater strategies, taking over East Main Street, really necking that down, adding in some trees for shading and for cooling effect along the street. And then knowing, I think as the mayor mentioned, the idea of some energy here in downtown, taking the existing parking lots that are there, putting in photovoltaic cells, thinking about charging stations. So this part of your downtown could be a green street, better open space, cooling areas, and then really capturing the notion of having some great energy for reusables and for sustainability as well. Let's go on to the next one, Ellie, because this is a little bit more of a recap here. We've jumped over by Olson Drive, by those locations that are on the west side of the river, by where those existing fields are. But the idea there about getting the community connected through a new trail system that would link north-south along the riverfront. The idea of taking what's an existing really wide road there and necking that down, having some bump outs at the corners, putting in some green infrastructure for stormwater control, thinking about pervious pavement for parking on that street versus just regular pavement. And then the idea of understanding what's happening on the river, some great overlooks, some resting areas to get shade and overlooks in the cooling of the river its front. This is a very special part of your downtown that really could be amplified to make it an amenity as well as perform from a resiliency perspective too. And let's go on to the next location. Again, showing these kind of applied kit of parts. Now we move north up along Riverside Drive. And again, the idea next to the existing flood protection system that's there today, there's really no reason why that cannot be further embraced and enhanced for the long term, and think about biking accessibility, stormwater improvements along that to help with localized flooding versus flooding from the river. And then the idea of some signage and some wayfinding, and the importance of thinking about these as a system that not only performs from the water, but also unlocks the ability to have some development, especially around the copper mill site across the river to the right-hand side there, if these new investments could lead towards better bridges, better connections, better flood wall systems and protection, that can start to unlock some of the economic development that's really a great potential for the downtown as well. And let's go on to the next slide here, Ellie. Again, as a recap. So with all of that in mind, where we ended last time on this kind of broader kit of parts, that we really believe that if you look at the entire downtown and all those locations that we looked at, you can start to think about how these resiliency kit of parts or these strategies can be deployed through these different locations so that over time, your downtown is very robust. It has a lot of green links to be able to get connected and this green infrastructure that'll let it perform. It has better ways of getting bikes and pedestrians around, and it's thinking about how you engage the river, how you have overlooks, and how that river really can be performing versus something that's just kind of behind the walls. And also, as the red line shows here, knowing how important that piece of infrastructure is from the flood wall protection system, further certifying it, further looking at the maintenance issues along that, we really know that that's a really critical part of the future as well. So with that, I think if we go to the next slide, Ellie, we'll start to dive in, a little bit further in terms of some of the accessibility parts of it. So you want to mention this one here, Ellie?
Yeah, sure. So we thought it would be useful to take maybe one small kernel of an idea that we proposed in the first section, such as the planted bump out, and actually break that down into how all the different ways that such a simple intervention could have a different impact in terms of resiliency. So we took just a sample transect of Main Street. Here you can see there's a pretty wide corridor with parking on either side. There's currently bus stops along that roadway, and then also sidewalk space. And we looked at it in terms of putting in a planted bump out to serve the purposes of enhancing connectivity. So although a bump out can provide some aesthetic value and visual relief, it also helps serve the purpose of safer streets as well by closing the distance of crossings. And so it can create a more walkable environment and a more transit-friendly environment as well. You could incorporate bike parking into the space allotted for the bump outs. You could also use the part of the bump out for a nicer bus stop landing that's easier to navigate to. You could use some of the bump out space for generating more signage about climate awareness or other public programming, or also integrate electric vehicle charging stations into some of these areas. There's lots of different ways that it could be utilized to really improve the pedestrian experience of people in the downtown. Likewise, you could look at a planted bump out as far as how it could serve for heat relief. You could use some of the space for integrating more public seating and shade structures. You could promote more shade canopy of trees along the corridor, or you could even integrate lighter colored pavement, which, as we talked about earlier, can help reflect heat and create a cooler land surface. Next, you could look at it purely in terms of stormwater management. You can integrate rainwater gardens or bioretention beds into the bump out space along the corridor. You could also incorporate some porous pavement into new materials that you introduce, which allows water to be redirected into the beds on either side of the street. You could even look at integrating a rooftop water catchment system, which could take that water and utilize it in the planted regions. And then lastly, we thought it would be exciting to think about a hybrid example where this simple intervention can then operate on many different planes of resiliency thinking. Here we have the bike parking idea incorporated into part of the bump out. You also have shade structures on the opposite side of the street, porous pavement used in the crossings, and shade canopy dispersed throughout. So it kind of helps just generate some ideas of how one simple intervention can actually have a large impact. And with that, we wanted to lead into the discussion section of the evening. And here we just have a little bit of direction on how to participate. I do believe that everyone on the call is familiar, but Jeffrey, I don't know if you want to.
And I think we have a relatively small audience tonight, so I think people can feel free to unmute themselves and just join the conversation. But also, maybe Ellie, if we go maybe to the next couple of slides here as like a reminder, what we'd love to do. We spent our last public meeting talking about all the kit parts, all zooming into those areas, even with a little bit of a refresher tonight. But with some of the comments, especially after tonight's public meeting, we'd love to hear a little bit more about that resiliency center idea and about showing how a little more investment into that as a project could really bear fruit for the entire community in terms of cooling, access, major events, and having that as a really secure place for the downtown and the access that goes to that. And as Ellie just walked us through, love to get a few more ideas around Main Street and how deploying any of those options along Main Street through bump outs and those enhancements that really what's already a great Main Street can come even better by having these kind of resiliency, Green Street, mobile, accessible aspects to it that can really help it perform in terms of your resiliency goals as well. So that's kind of what we'd like to spend a little time with. And I know maybe what I'd like to maybe just do open up David and John, because I know you're working with many communities here throughout Connecticut, just to maybe get a quick soundbite from you about, why these projects might make some sense, but also, if the city can rally around, identifying some of their top priorities, why this is helpful to start moving these from big ideas into things that might become fundable over time too. So help us maybe a little bit with the context, David, might be great.
Sure, I can say a couple words. And Nancy, it looks like you're the person here who I don't know. So if you're involved with city government and want to shout that out, let me know before I say too much. But in general, we were interested in looking for ways to plug into all the good work already happening in Ansonia. There's so much that's happening downtown, and the city's been so successful gaining grants and with the redevelopment and the units coming online and the future of Ansonia Brass and Copper, we thought it would be remiss to not try to offer some ideas to become more resilient. And we know the city feels confident that it's resilient to flooding, but we thought it was a good opportunity to come in and make a strong statement about how the flood protection system is really part and parcel to being able to redevelop. And that's going to be a statement that's going to be important to carry going forward, because there are folks out there who really do believe that development behind flood protection systems is not prudent, and we want to be able to support Ansonia in its future goals. At the same time, we recognize the heat vulnerabilities in a place that's as developed as Ansonia, and we recognize that there was going to be a benefit to identifying some potential locations for respite from heat. So we're just happy the city was able to accommodate us helping out. And John, do you want to say anything about the Resilience Hub aspect?
Sure. Yeah, I think the idea of the Resilience Center is something that we're starting to see more interest in. And there are some other places around the country that have developed the idea of a facility that the community already utilizes. There's a trusted facility that can be augmented with robust backup power and emergency supplies of food and water and emergency communications capacity, something that the community can sort of rely on in a situation like we had during Isaias a couple years ago. A huge section of the state including a lot of the southwestern part of the state, lost power. Many places lost power for up to 10 days after Isaias. And, I think these resilience centers or resilience hubs can help to support residents during that type of an event. It can be a connection to the community, between the community and the emergency services and city government. And so we're excited to see that concept is kind of emerged as something that could happen in Ansonia, and we're hoping to work with a number of different communities across the state in moving that idea forward. So so we're excited about the idea of the Resilience Center in addition to the other things that David mentioned.
Great. Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, John. Appreciate you chiming in about that as well. And I know, Nancy, you're on here as well. Not to put you on the spot, but do you have any questions? I know coming from the Valley perspective and knowing the good work that you do throughout the district,
My question is this considered a study at this point? And how is it funded? And this is the first I happened to see something on the Valley Indy today about this program. I didn't know there was a first one, so I just thought because I did have time, I chimed in tonight. So
Great.
I'm just curious, what does AECOM stand for?
Great. Yeah, so AECOM, we're consultants that are hired by the state through the CIRCA office, which David and John mentioned. That's really the state resilient. They deal with state resiliency issues, and they've been partnering over the last several years with different communities to be able to understand, plan for, and start to mitigate some of the flooding and sea level rise and resiliency issues. So this is very much a study. This study builds upon some prior work that identified this location as a prime candidate to be able to have some of these interventions that would help secure it for the future. But in particular, we've been working on this for like the last 9 to 12 months, as we showed in our drawings, thinking about why we would have certain improvements, what some of those benefits would be, how we're trying to be holistic about the entire downtown as a kind of living, breathing system of all these things that are interrelated. And given that the flood wall protection system is there today, and understanding how critical that is, how can we plan with and around that to identify some real projects that could move forward into the future that would go beyond studying and master plan and hopefully get into projects that the city can move forward with, whether it's on the city's own dollars or whether there's grants that they can go after, or maybe even potentially partner with the state on trying to figure out ways of starting to implement these things over time. So as I think we showed tonight, of all the different things that we looked at, and frankly, there's a lot of opportunity within Ansonia to really make some inroads on a resiliency perspective. The top two that really rose to our thinking was this idea of making this hub that John talked about, the Ansonia Armory, and investing more in that to make it a benefit for the entire community. But also the idea of taking some of your major roads downtown and taking, again, as I mentioned, an already great street and make them even better by doing some of these interventions that'll really set you up for success there too. So I think more to come on that, Nancy, but the idea is let's use these types of planning studies to position, Sheila at the city and others and the mayor towards going after implementing more things. And as David mentioned, there's a lot of amazing projects that are in the pipeline or working downtown. So this is very much trying to be very complementary to a lot of those other things that are currently under the works. So hopefully that helps answer that question. Anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and AECOM is really just it's a consulting firm that does planning, engineering, landscape architecture, all of that type of work, helping communities deal with these types of questions.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And Nancy, I can just also say that we're working with AECOM on a couple other resiliency projects that CIRCA is funding. So they're a partner with us on a few other communities as well.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah. So I think again, I think this is partly why we're recording this for this evening, is trying to work with the city and getting it posted and available for people to get more comments. This is really about building awareness and about talking about the long-term future of Ansonia, and again, identifying a couple of key projects here along the way. So let me just go back. So I don't think we have anyone else that's joined, but maybe what we can do is is maybe focus on wrapping up in some next steps. You want to talk about that, Ellie, a little bit, like where we're going with this next in terms of our process? Because really we're kind of towards the end of where we've been working through a lot of these strategies with Sheila and with some different local stakeholders and different departments. But we're really looking to wrap this up within the next, frankly, 3 or 4 weeks to be able to get things wrapped up. So hence we'll post this via Sheila to the city's website, looking to get a lot of feedback about where we can continue to prioritize a lot of these different recommendations and make them stronger as we're preparing that final report. But then what we're looking to do is let that become a very action-oriented and an implementation-focused report where they can use this to go after, as I mentioned, future funds and grants and so forth as well. So that's what we're looking to do over the next few weeks. And frankly, we've been really excited to find so much potential in Ansonia in terms of what the opportunities are there. When you start to work on a project like this, it's not always obvious if you can make some inroads and some changes that can be effective. And frankly, we were kind of delighted that throughout the entire downtown, from like an economic development perspective, from a beautification, heat, cooling, sustainability, from stormwater perspective, there's a lot of great things that could be ahead for Ansonia. And if you think about investing in smart things and in the future generations, there's a lot of great potential that we're excited about as well here. So before we close out, Ellie, anything else that we wanted to mention for tonight in terms of next steps or major takeaways for us over the last few weeks and months?
Well, one thing that we'll also be working on in the next few weeks is developing the cost estimate as well for some of these interventions. It's something we haven't really touched on yet. Given that this is a pretty high level study, where we're really trying to look at the town holistically, as you mentioned, I think that our approach will be to look at each one of these interventions independently and see how we might be able to analyze the costs and how that could be scalable as well for each one of these. So that's another another asset that we're looking to incorporate in the final report to hopefully help be able to better fund projects in Ansonia in the future.
Great. Thanks for that, Ellie. That's a great reminder. Like understanding preliminary costs will help to understand future phasing and funding and all those great things as well. So David, let me turn back to you in terms of, any major takeaways from this project or next steps or what you're excited about, maybe what might be coming next as well.
Nothing in particular. We're dedicated to working with Sheila and with the mayor's office going forward to line up projects with funding sources. So more to come on that. And all of you have to remind me to stop recording when it's time, because sometimes I forget.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we're almost a minute or two away from here. And John, let me just turn back to you one more time in case there's anything else you wanted to, even broader context here that might be helpful for the folks that might be watching at home later.
No, I think David covered it. We're here to support the city in taking some of these concepts and looking for federal or state grant funds that can help to get some things implemented. And so we're looking forward to seeing some of that happen.
Excellent. Thank you for that, John. Appreciate it. And maybe last call. I'm not sure, Nancy, do you have any other questions before?
No, I thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining tonight. Really appreciate it. And as I mentioned, we're excited to share the news and really try to be supportive of what the city's needs are. And we know there's a lot of projects out there, a lot of needs in many locations, but hopefully this will be a really good playbook, kind of a kit of parts, as Ellie mentioned, understanding scale of projects by having some financial resources within this in terms of budgets, and help the city continue to move forward in investing in the downtown. So again, super excited about that. Thanks to those that have joined tonight. We really appreciate it. And thanks to the mayor for opening us up tonight as well. And what we'll do is we'll work to get this posted in the next few days. And then we're looking forward to more comments. And as we all mentioned, we're looking forward to wrap this up probably by early November. And wishing the city and all the different stakeholders a lot of success on moving forward with whatever comes next out of this project work. And just wanted to thank everybody for those that have been involved during the process. It's really meant a lot to us, and hope everyone has a great night. So with that, David, if you want to stop recording, and I think we're good for the night. So good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.